In order to become fully involved in the true sauna spirit, one must develop a full understanding not only for the sauna process, but also for its traditions and the nature of the enjoyment. Bert Olavi Yalisya from his book, The Art of Sauna Building.
Hi, this is Risto, and welcome back to the Sauna Trail podcast. Join us in our adventures as we share the story of how our family discovered the world of Finnish sauna. You might be wondering, why would anyone do a podcast dedicated to something as commonplace as sauna? It's like doing a podcast about milk or rabbits or crayons. Well, if you stick around, you might find out there's more to sauna than you realized. Today we wrap up our episode series about our return to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. In episode 1, we used one of our favorite saunas at Skoog Camp, discovered the delicious baked goods at the Wooden Spoon in Mohawk, Michigan, and explored several places in the Keweenaw Peninsula. Last week, we used a sauna on the other side of the peninsula, found a bakery run by monks, had some mind-blowing homemade apple cider, and visited a historic savu sauna, or smoke sauna, at the Honka homestead. And this week we leave the Keweenaw and drive east to the central part of the Upper Peninsula, near Republic, Michigan, which is in the Michigamme River Basin. We invited my family to join us in the UP again, to see the beautiful and rocky region around Republic, and of course to experience an excellent log sauna. And my brother and his family took us up on the offer. And they're joining us on the podcast today. So welcome to Greg, Clarissa, Norah, and Everett.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Clarissa had joined us in episode 6 called Generations. Greg and Claire's family had traveled with us to Isabella, Minnesota, and we had used a log sauna up there as well. If you haven't listened to that episode, I'd encourage you to check it out. We talked about the wonderful and rich aspect of generational sauna. So just a few questions before we move on to our time in Republic. Greg and Claire, had you guys been up to the UP before this trip?
No, the UP was kind of on our limit of road trips at that point. And so it was pushing the limit of what we could drive.
Yeah, we had a 3 and a 1-year-old-ish at the time. So 6.5, 7 hours was a challenge for the drive.
Up to this point, what did you guys think of sauna? What did you guys know of it? What was your experience, thoughts?
I mean, I had been hooked since the first time I tried real sauna at Viroqua when you invited me and Dad up there. And yeah, as soon as it felt like my skin was going to melt off and I got the spins, I was like, I'm hooked. So I think I had tried that and Isabella and one other sauna at this point. I was fully hooked, but I think you were still kind of on the fence, right?
Yeah, this was the trip that did it for me. Like, Isabella was not it.
Yeah, and I remember the exact moment, so
Yep.
we will talk about that too. So lots to look forward to in this episode. But you weren't hooked, Claire. Greg, you
No.
were, but you still agreed, Claire, to drive the 6.5 hour drive.
Yep.
With 2 little kids and go do this with us.
Yep. I most often am up for an adventure. I like to try new things and I like to travel.
Yeah, you and I are very similar, so it's a good thing we married these brothers who are very adventurous. So we'll start with talking about our drive from the Keweenaw to the Republic and the adventures that we had once Greg and Claire joined us in that Republic area. Then we'll wrap up with talking about the sauna, and we'll go ahead and show the 360-degree pictures at the end.
So we drove down to Republic before you guys, and on our way, we kind of drove along the coast, and then we stopped in and we saw this motel called Carla's Inn. Since it's the UP, it's no surprise they had a sauna in the hotel there. It was just like a pretty large sauna room with a quite large water heater. And I think back in the day, they were able to use the sauna to heat the water for the motel. And then there was also a random log sauna that we saw as we were driving by along the road.
Yeah, this log sauna, I think we saw it last year. And we kept driving by it, and Christopher was like, oh, that is a beautiful sauna. So this year, to go along with what we did the last few episodes of just randomly talking to people, we stopped to see if the owners of this log sauna was around, and they actually let us in and showed us inside as well.
Yeah, so that was cool. And I think we also picked up some frozen pasties and got to the rental that evening and watched some of the World Series.
I think it was the Indians and the Cubs that year. We all chose which team we thought was going to win. And I remember being one of the few people that stuck with my team the whole way through. I chose the Cubs.
That's right, yeah, because it was pretty rare that the Cubs made it to the World Series. So
Yep.
And I will say, I think of all of the places that we've been in the UP, that rental, I think, was the only place that had a TV.
Yeah, or at least a TV that worked.
Yeah.
And then you guys ended up driving later. You got there later.
Yeah, I was tutoring Spanish at the time. And so I can't remember what time, but I had to work that evening. And so we left after that. And I remember being really tired, falling asleep, like I was about to fall asleep in the front seat. And the headlights caught deer eyes. And I think the adrenaline shot through me. And I was like, okay, I need to stay awake to watch for deer with Greg. We saw 57 deer on the drive. And it was just a chunk of the drive. It was about a 7-hour drive. And I think 3 hours in or so, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to sleep now. And later we realized we were driving during the rut because it was in October and it was a national forest. So it was all of the makings of a lot of deer.
Yeah, it was a beautiful drive through a national forest. I was enjoying it.
Yeah, you want to be careful when you're driving through northern Wisconsin through that national forest. Anytime where deer might be out, just avoid, stay a motel night somewhere, drive at a different time of day. It's pretty dangerous.
We went pretty slow on that drive. I mean, we were quite a bit under the speed limit while we were watching that. So, yeah.
And I think you guys got in.
It was after midnight, I think.
Yeah, almost probably close to 1 a.m.
Yeah.
So you were driving through the night. And I think we were talking about, we didn't realize that deer were nocturnal. They were up in the middle of the night. We thought, well, at dusk, watch out for deer, but at midnight, but apparently they were all out.
Yep.
Well, and what were some of your memories from the trip? We'll talk about the sauna stuff later in the episode, but just about the rental or the area. We did a bunch of things up there.
I actually was just talking to a family recently that's from the UP, from Marquette.
Oh.
And I couldn't remember the name of the hotel that we had dinner at. It was like a supper club in Big Bay.
Oh, that's right.
Or near Big Bay, because I bought that cutting board from the little shop.
That's right.
And that's the only reason I even remembered it was Big Bay, because it says who made the cutting board and then it's stamped on the back.
That's right. So Big Bay is, I think, north and west of Marquette, kind of up the coast. It's kind of a town at the end of the road. There was a famous movie filmed there with Jimmy Stewart. I think is it Anatomy of a Murder? I think that might be it. But it's some Jimmy Stewart movie that was filmed up there in Big Bay. So that's their claim to fame. Yeah, and we ate at a restaurant there.
And they told me, as I described it to them, they told me, and then we looked it up. I can't remember what it is now, but we found it on Google Maps. And I was like, oh, yeah, yep, that's what it was.
I remember we hiked around near that rental. That was a beautiful area and fun to explore.
Yeah, but we did a hike to a waterfall.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think my clearest memories of the rental, I remember grilling sausages and standing out by the fire, eating those, enjoying the stars. Let's see, did we kayak here? Did we explore on the water? Yeah, that's right.
When we kayaked, was it you and I
Yep.
and then the 3 girls? Or just 2 of them?
I think Norah was with you in the kayak in the picture. So you guys kayaked over there and you got out?
We got out and walked around the island.
I remember kayaking to the island and we got out, we were walking around and there were just random ruined buildings kind of scattered across the island.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anybody else on the island?
No.
Did you run across anybody?
No.
And it was a smaller island too.
Yeah.
Kayaking back from the island back to the main shore. I think Nala got tired and we had to tie her to Uncle Greg's kayak and he rowed her back or whatever.
Is that true, Nala?
To my knowledge, yes.
It's definitely true.
He's still sore about that.
Yeah, we've had a few kayaking adventures up in the UP. A few years later, when we returned with my whole family, Greg, you, and Henry kayaked out to Rabbit Island. That was quite a long kayak.
Honestly, it was a beautiful, not too difficult kayak. We got there and also got out and explored the island a little bit, found some raspberries and picked and ate those, walked around a little bit, and then when we kayaked back around, we found a sauna on the island that I think we knew there might be a sauna out there ahead of time. and it looked like somebody was getting it ready, heating it up. So we didn't end up stopping and chatting, but it looked like an amazing place for a sauna. And then when we got back, come to find out the locals thought it was a little insane that we kayaked out to that island.
I think the rest of us were thinking you were insane to kayak all the way out to that island because it was far.
It was really far. And I remember they made it there and back just fine. And Henry capsized in like waist deep water. Like a wave, I think he had turned parallel to the shore and the wave just tipped the boat enough that he just tipped over in standing water.
Well, and speaking of capsizing, we were trying to get Hudson to go kayaking with Julie. And how old was he on this trip?
Back to Republic. He was
6, I think.
Yeah, so he was 6 years old, so pretty young. And then we put him in the kayak, and I thought it would be a good idea to get them all loaded up on kind of this floating dock and then push the kayak in. But the mistake I made was that when I pushed it over the edge of the dock, it flipped both of them over upside down. So I'm just looking at them trapped upside down in the water.
I realize I'm underwater at this point. I come up and I look around and I don't see Hudson anywhere. And I hear Christopher going, "Where's Hudson?" I think at that point we realized that he was under the kayak. So fortunately he had a life jacket. So I popped down underneath the kayak and I just see Hudson there laying on his back with the life jacket, just looking up at the kayak and just in shock, I think, of what had just happened. And then the next thing I know, the kayak was being flipped over and there's Christopher flipping the kayak over. And so then Hudson and I get back to shore. And I think he's, like I said, kind of in shock. And so we were like, well, let's take off our life jackets and go in the sauna and warm up because he was cold. So we go in the sauna, we warm up, and I come back out, and Christopher's like, "You got to get back in the kayak and go kayaking with Hudson." And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And he goes, "No, you need to do that so that Hudson knows that it's okay to go kayak." So we go down to the dock, but what I see at the dock is Christopher's wallet and credit cards and car key, and I think pants and shirt on the dock drying because he had jumped in with his clothes on to save us, including all of the stuff in his pants pocket. So then Hudson and I got back in the kayak while the kayak was next to the dock this time. And then we went for a short little ride and didn't flip over. Do you remember thinking anything, Hudson?
I just remember flipping over and I was just like in the kayak in the little hole there. So I don't really remember what I was thinking though.
Were you scared?
Not really.
No? Well, that's good.
So we took a few trips out. We went to Big Bay. We went to a pizza place in, I can't remember which town it was, Ishpeming. I think the girls went out to Marquette and went thrifting, right?
Yeah. And it was a really nice thrift store. Like it had some really nice stuff. I remember getting a Land's End hooded sweatshirt for like $4. And I think we found like quality like mittens and like winter gear.
Yeah, Becca got ice skates.
So that was a fun day.
And then while you guys were out thrifting, Greg, myself, and I can't remember if it was Everett and maybe Hudson and Daniel or one of them, we drove to a place that has a couple saunas, Pinecrest and Cedarhurst. I think they might do some wedding venue stuff or rentals for bigger groups. And we checked out their saunas. And then we also drove on a logging road to just kind of see what things were like.
We had a Pontiac vibe at that point, which looks like it wants to be an off-road vehicle, but is not at all. And I think we were scraping bottom for a good chunk of that ride on that log road.
Yeah, and it was super like muddy, and I was surprised we didn't get stuck.
Yeah.
I don't remember that you guys went on this road. I don't think I realized how sketchy of a drive this was.
I heard about it when they came back. I was like, did our car survive? Will we be able to get home?
It did. We made it home.
And then some other exploring. I included this picture just because I thought it was so random. We were driving around and it said, "Vote Uncle Mike town mayor." I don't know who Uncle Mike is, but I just thought it was funny.
That feels very Yooper.
This is a painting, a mural on a building, and it's a guy, I think, in the mines holding a pasty. So it was very large. So here's that waterfall that we were talking about. The boys walking all over the logs and wet rocks. And we have a few pictures of the kids and Christopher being just silly. And at one point, Christopher took Hudson along the edge of the water. And if you remember a few weeks ago, I had talked about Christopher pushing my comfort zone and pushing my safety meter for parenting. And so here's a picture of Hudson. I think Christopher's got him by the scruff of the neck as they're walking along the edge of this waterfall. And I'm just standing there holding my breath. That I did take a picture just in case it was the last picture I ever have of Hudson, but it was fine. It was fine.
Yeah, this looks fun, Hudson. Wouldn't you like to do this again?
I don't know. And then he also had them fight on a log. He just wanted to see who was going to push the other kid off first. And then this next picture of the boys falling over and Christopher's face is like, ooh, are they okay? That's how I feel all the time. And these are the kids just being goofy.
So this was around the rental. You guys took a hike around the rental. And one cool thing about the Republic area is there are lots of rocks and lots of interesting terrain.
And that was like a huge boulder that we climbed on top of.
Yeah. And I remember walking around and there would be like, we would stomp on areas and it sounded hollow underneath us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is where Aunt Claire taught us to play the card game Trash. We played that like all one morning. She taught us, and then we played it nonstop for a very long time.
And then we had a wood stove in the rental, a wood burning stove. There was also a regular stove, but I really enjoyed lighting this and tending to it and using it. So I did actually use that wood stove. That was really a lot of fun for me.
I feel like a lot of these rentals that have stoves like that, there's always like a don't use this. This is decorative. So it was cool that we actually got to use it and cook on it.
And we didn't burn the place down.
No, not yet.
One other memory I have is while you guys were sauning, I think, Greg and Claire, I was kind of in charge of watching Everett. He was actually put down for a nap, but when you guys went out, he just was crying and screaming in the room when he was supposed to be taking a nap. So I went in and I was like, Everett, you need to take a nap. You need to go to sleep. Your parents they're out, just outside. It's okay. And then I left, but then you kept screaming and crying. And so I came back in the room and I said, Everett, you really need to go back to sleep, okay? Stop crying. And then I left, and then I came back, and you still were doing it. And I said, Everett, and I was kind of a mean uncle here, but Everett, if you don't stop crying, I've got this glass of water, and I'm going to pour it on you. And he didn't believe me, so then I poured a little bit of water on him. And after that, he's like, oh, man, this guy is serious. I don't like getting wet. And then he went to bed.
I only remember the story being told to me.
It was actually for a couple of years afterwards. If he was struggling, every once in a while I could pull this out of the hat as a threat. Be like, do I need to have Uncle Christopher come over here and pour water on your head?
Oh, man. That was great.
So here's Greg starting a big fire. They had a nice fire pit just a little ways away from the sauna. You can see the log sauna in the background.
One night when we had a bonfire, we actually we had these rounds of birch bark, like hollow birch bark, that we put in the fire and burned. And like the fire went up through the birch bark. I remember just being fascinated because it was really cool.
Yeah, if you ever find hollowed out birch bark that you want to light, that's really fun.
Mom had collected a whole bunch of birch bark and she was going to do something with it. And then I remember someone burned it. I was so sad about that.
Yeah, so that was me.
I think I had collected it to decorate. I thought I would be this, cool decorator in my house with beautiful pieces of birch bark. And I didn't know that people used it to start fires.
Yeah, you didn't realize you had a couple of pyros.
So there's the sauna, close up of the sauna.
It has an exterior feed to the stove there. You can see.
I think this was the first external feeds. That was interesting.
Yeah, we got a galvanized tub for Everett to use in the hot room because I'd read about Finnish people bringing their kids in really young. And then also when you heated that sauna stove, I remember that you got the stovepipe super red.
Yeah. I didn't have enough healthy fear of overheating sauna stoves. And so I really, really pushed that stove.
Claire and I were in the sauna with the kids. And again, like I'm not wearing my glasses, but I can see like colors and stuff. And I look over at the stove and the stovepipe is like red. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we're going to burn this place down. So I go back out and I'm like, the stovepipe is red. What are you doing? And Greg's like, oh, okay.
And I just thought that was part of it being hot.
Yeah, you two are going to burn something down one of these days.
So let's look at some of the 360-degree pictures of the sauna. This is outside on the front porch of the sauna. You can see it was a little bit kind of you can't see the drop off there, but it was a little bit steep to get down to this floating dock. There's the tub that we got for Everett to hang out in.
We would fill it with water and just let him play on the floor in the hot room.
So they had kind of a nice medium-sized changing room, and you can see that the ceiling is vaulted, but it was good sauna construction. They flattened it off for the hot room so you wouldn't lose all your heat up there.
They had a refrigerator in the changing room, which was nice to put beverages in.
Yeah, one thing I remember with the changing room, though, the floor was concrete, which I don't know if that was one of the first times I used a sauna with like a concrete floor, and it got really cold, like especially in the evening. I didn't like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you could put rugs down or some sort of wood duckboard to help with that. And then this is in the hot room. You can see they have a water line, which is nice. And it was a log sauna. The last log sauna, Isabella, that we used, it was kind of hard to get any hotter than 180 degrees. But this stove could get raging hot.
Yeah, I think at one point I was looking at the thermometer, and I think it said 240 when the stovepipe was bright red. I think it was 240 when Greg was feeding that stove.
But you can see they have lots of rocks there, and then a keg water heater with a trash can lid on it.
Can't get much Yooper than that.
Although I do think part of Isabella was we didn't quite know how to tend a sauna stove at that time. But this one, I remember the hot box being huge. And so you could just put so much wood in there.
And you did.
And I did. Too much. But tons of rocks on this one. I feel like I remember the Lolu in this one being really, really nice and harsh when we got it up that high. So
I really liked that there was water right into the hot room.
Yeah, after using a bunch of different saunas, this one still is up towards the top. A couple of the downsides were getting in the water was a little tricky, although I think if I went back, I would be okay with it, just understanding that ahead of time. And then the rental, you could see the road kind of off in the distance, so you didn't feel totally remote and in nature.
yeah, but even that, I think, compared with some of the ones that we've used since, it didn't feel like you were close enough to anybody that it impacted your ability to relax between rounds it didn't feel that exposed. I think at this point we were comparing everything to Viroqua, to the seclusion and that setting. And so, yeah, it was still quite nice.
Yeah. So, Claire, it was just you and I taking a sauna. Do you want to talk about that? And I think that was the moment for you. Am I right?
Yeah, this was the first time that it made sense why people do this, because I think it was at night. You couldn't see. We had to like navigate down from the sauna to the water. It was kind of freaky trying to get from the sauna to the water. And then you're like going down into the dark in the abyss. And you were like, no, you have to get in and you have to put your head under. And I was like, this sounds awful. I just remember not really being sure about it. But I remember crawling out, like trying to get back out of the water onto the dock. And the dock was like a funny slant. And then laying back and seeing the stars. And I got the spins and I was like, oh, I get this now. I got it. I see why people like this.
Yeah. And I want to say it was like the second or third round where you were like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it.
I just remember laying on that dock, looking at the stars because it was really nice and dark. And like, okay, I get it.
And I think the other part for me was every time we'd gone together as a family, it was always like with the kids or with Christopher. But I was always usually worried about the kids, like who's coming in, who's coming out. Are they cold? Are they hot? What are they doing? Are they safe? And I think this time it was like the kids were in there with the dads and it was just you and I. I felt like I could really relax. And so I think that was a big piece of it too, was just like laying back on that dock. And it was a clear night where I could tell it was clear and I could see a few stars. It was just amazing.
Yeah, because this is your first sauna with a cold plunge.
Yeah,
Was it your second sauna total, like finished sauna?
I think so.
And then, but that first one, we didn't get in the water. Cold plunge is really key to understanding what sauna can be. I think you guys took sauna as a couple. So, and that's really traditional for Finnish people to have different couples take sauna kind of separately.
One, it is like you said too, it was nice to be able to take it not as mom and dad, because then you aren't worried about the kids burning themselves on the stove or going in and out or whatever, or drowning in the lake. Like you're like, okay, I can just relax. The kids are inside.
This was the trip where this started to not just be the crazy thing that she had to do as part of a trip and actually become something that she enjoyed. And that session together was after you two went. It was the first time that I floated us getting a sauna of our own, but you still weren't at the point where you were ready to
Spend the money on it.
spend the money on
Yep.
it. Yeah.
So it was a good sauna, like I've said overall. I think I really learned that the heat from a log sauna is very nice.
I remember going in the next morning and we were amazed how hot it still was.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that too.
And that sauna with family is good. That was also kind of re-emphasized here. Did you guys ever get a sauna? You talked about getting a sauna. What has your sauna adventure been like since this trip?
After this trip, now it didn't feel like I had to convince you to travel to a sauna as much. And we ended up having a couple anniversaries where we got a rental specifically with a sauna. One of those was at Camp Keweenaw. And so we stayed in the apartment and used that, and it was really nice. And so at this point, we knew that we wanted to try to sauna regularly and loop it into our vacations.
And that place in Wisconsin that was right on the river for our 10th anniversary.
So at this point, I had gotten her interested enough to plan trips around sauna, but it still took a couple of years, I think, for you to be on board with spending the money to get one. And it was actually not until we moved down to Texas.
Ironically.
Which, there weren't many prospects for sauna down there, that we decided that we would buy a kit sauna with a wood-burning stove and install it in our backyard right next to our house, which, given my track record with stoves, was probably not the wisest, safest option, but we never burned it down. So I think gradually over the next couple of years, we just kept using saunas and got hooked and got to the point where we felt like it was something that we wanted to do regularly as a family.
And we still have that sauna, and we don't live in Texas anymore.
Yeah, so I took that sauna apart, loaded it onto a moving truck, and brought it back up, and have converted it to be an electric now, but I miss a wood-burning stove.
I don't miss that stove.
You don't miss the wood burning?
Not that particular one.
Yeah, you have a nice electric setup. It's an electric that with a heater that holds over 300 pounds of rocks.
And when he disassembled and rebuilt the kit that we had, I really like how he reconfigured it, because it used to be you'd walk in, and as you walked in, you'd be looking at the two benches perpendicular to the door. And now the way that he reconfigured it, the door is in the middle, and you walk in, you're standing between two parallel benches. And so it's really nice for talking to people during sauna.
It is nice. It is a nice setup. I like that.
And so I guess one other question for you guys is, you've talked about sauna and getting your own sauna. What about the UP? Have you been back to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? What do you think of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan?
We have since gone back. I think we've gone twice, but it's been to the Keweenaw. We really liked the Keweenaw. It was really pretty.
I think this trip to Republic was great, but I think the original idea was to go to the Keweenaw, and we said that's too far. So years later, we went back and went up to the Keweenaw and finally got to see why you all love that so much. There is something really special about being able to run into Superior between rounds, and we actually ended up going back there as a family separately because we enjoyed it so much. And to me, it feels like a place designed for sauna.
Well, and I was amazed too, because Superior, growing up in Minnesota, I had always been to Duluth, and that was the experience I had with Superior. So when you guys would come back and talk about going into Superior, I just imagined drowning, because the waves are so intense in Duluth. Like, the waves are always crashing on the shore, and I'm like, what are they doing? That sounds awful. I think I'm going to be fighting for my life the whole time. And then in the Bay area, we stayed in Rabbit Bay, and that's perfect. Like, there's waves, but you're not crashing against rocks as you get in and out of the lake.
Yeah, it really kind of is a magical place up there. You feel disconnected from the rest of society. It's quite a bit of drive. It's kind of at the end of the road. It's not really built up. There's not a lot of resorts or anything in that area.
It's not fancy. Ironically, though, is it any further to the Keweenaw than it is Republic?
Where we go, I think it's a little bit further. Let's see how far Republic is. So Republic's about a little over 6 hours. And I think the place that we go up in the Keweenaw is 7.5. So just a little bit longer.
Ironically, now I'm like, really? An hour difference?
Well, but you did have little kids. They were 3 and they were 1, almost 2, and
and coming at night after working. everything like that.
We also just came from a family that doesn't like to drive.
Right.
And so 6 hours was already a stretch. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think that covers most of what we had to talk about. Thank you for joining us on our sauna adventures. It's been a lot of fun, and I promise not to take you down too many more muddy roads. But we are going to have some other vehicle misfortunes coming up soon.
Yep. Stay tuned for that.
Thanks for joining us today as we wrapped up our adventures in the UP. In our previous episode, we mentioned that a bunch of Yoopers started joining the Wood Burning Sauna Facebook group. Come back next week as we talk more about the group. We'll share about some of the people we've met and recount some of the more interesting posts from over the years. If you haven't yet, join our locals community and say hi. It's free to sign up. You'll get regular updates from us. If you enjoy our content and would like to support this podcast, Locals has that option as well. The address is thesaunatrail.locals.com. We appreciate all of our supporters and fellow sauna hounds. Our podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and other streaming platforms, as well as our website, thesaunatrail.com. New episodes release Saturdays, which is the traditional Finnish day for sauna, also called Sauna Päivä. We hope to see you on the Sauna Trail.